Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Amelia Hayes had spent 23 years building a home filled with warmth, tradition, and love for her husband, Robert, and their children, Marcus and Isla. But on Thanksgiving night, as the family gathered around her carefully prepared table, Robert shattered that world with a single announcement. He was selling the house to start a new life with Eleanor Davies and her 3 young children. What began as quiet suspicion of late nights and unanswered questions unraveled into a web of lies, secret bank accounts, and promises Robert made to another family while neglecting his own. Yet Amelia was not the passive, trusting wife Robert thought she was. With careful planning, the guidance of her attorney, Mr. Davies, and the unwavering support of her children, Amelia turned heartbreak into strength, reclaiming her home, her independence, and her life. What Robert never saw coming was how swiftly betrayal could turn back on him, and how perfectly timed karma could be. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. The cranberry sauce simmered softly on the stove when Robert's phone buzzed for what felt like the 7th time that morning. From the doorway, I watched the way his expression lit up a light I hadn't seen in months. At least, not for me. "Robert, could you give me a hand with the turkey?" I asked, struggling with the 20-pound bird that had been roasting since dawn. The kitchen smelled of sage and butter, just like my mother's did when I was Leela's age. I'd been up since 5, determined to make this Thanksgiving flawless. "In a minute," he muttered, his thumbs moving quickly across the screen. I hefted the turkey on my own, my lower back aching, a reminder that 47 is not 25. My husband couldn't even look up long enough to help with the meal I had been planning for a week. I swallowed the irritation. Today was supposed to be about family. Marcus had arrived the night before from Brighton, smart in his new suit, though his eyes were weary from long hours at his consulting job. Isla breezed in that morning with her usual whirlwind of energy, arms loaded with wine, bottles, and stories from her graduate studies. Seeing both of them at my table again made every moment of preparation worth it. The dining room looked like a picture in a magazine. I'd set the table with my grandmother's delicate blue china, reserved only for special days, the centerpiece, cornucopia filled with gourds, autumn leaves, and flickering battery candles, had taken me nearly 2 hours to arrange. Robert had passed through 3 times without a word. "Mum, this stuffing is incredible," Marcus said, helping himself to a second serving. "Is it the same recipe Grandma used?" "With a few tweaks," I answered, smiling as I watched him enjoy each bite. "I added dried cherries this year." Isla raised her glass of red wine to Mum for pulling off another Thanksgiving miracle. Her cheeks glowed, and she looked so young, so happy, that my heart swelled. We clinked glasses, and for a moment everything felt just as I had hoped. This was what I envisioned when I folded napkins at 6 in the morning, when I mashed potatoes by hand instead of letting the mixer do it. Warmth, connection, belonging. Then Robert's phone buzzed again. He glanced down, and something shifted in his face. "Everything okay, Dad?" Isla asked, noticing. "Fine," he replied quickly, sliding the phone into his pocket. But his leg began bouncing under the table. The same nervous habit I'd seen countless times before, after 23 years of marriage. I knew all his tells, the way he cleared his throat before saying something difficult, the way he avoided eye contact when he was hiding something, the way he squared his shoulders when preparing for an announcement. He was doing all 3 now. Actually, Robert stood so abruptly his chair scraped across the hardwood. The sound sliced through. The laughter. Marcus and Isla froze, forks halfway up. He cleared his throat. I have something to share. Robert, I said softly, can't this wait until after dinner? He didn't meet my eyes. I'm selling the house. The words dropped like a stone. Ila's glass stopped midway to her lips. Marcus's fork clattered against his plate. What? Ila whispered. But Robert kept going, his tone the same one he used in boardrooms. Eleanor and the kids need more space. Noah's 8, Liam's 6, and little Chloe just turned 4. They're growing fast, and the apartment is too small. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hall, the hum of the refrigerator, and the pounding of my own heartbeat. Eleanor, he had said her name. At our Thanksgiving table, in front of our children, the woman I had forced myself to pretend didn't exist. Marcus's face drained of color. Dad, what are you talking about? Eleanor is my girlfriend, Robert said as casually as if he were discussing the weather. We've been together for 8 months. She has 3 kids from her first marriage, and they need a real home. Ila let out a sound as if she'd been punched. Girlfriend, I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, as my children's faces crumbled. This was how he chose to tell them, cold, public, businesslike. The house will sell quickly. Robert continued, blind to the wreckage around him. Eleanor found a place in Richmond, 5 bedrooms, a big yard, good schools. The kids will love it. What about us? Isla whispered. What about Mum? At last Robert looked at me. There was defiance in his eyes, as though daring me to explode, to give him the excuse to call me hysterical. But I didn't. Slowly. I stood and walked to my purse on the counter. My hands were steady as I pulled out the envelope I'd carried. For weeks, waiting for the right moment. Perhaps this was it. I set it by his plate, directly on the gravy stain from his speech. Since you're making announcements, I said quietly, finally meeting his gaze. Then I sat back down and picked up my fork, forcing myself to chew sweet potato casserole that suddenly tasted like ashdot. The envelope sat between us like a weapon. For the first time that evening, Robert looked uncertain. I listened to his tired answers, the perfect trusting wife, but something didn't quite fit. Perhaps it was the way he avoided Myers, or how he showered immediately instead of collapsing on the sofa as usual. Small things, tiny fractures in our routine that I explained. A Waybackers the alternative was too terrifying to consider. Late nights became a pattern. Big presentation tour, he'd say, grabbing his briefcase. Don't wait up for me. Idly in bed, listening for his car in the driveway. Watching the clock as midnight turned to 1 a.m., then 2. When I questioned the long hours, he'd sigh heavily, making me feel guilty for questioning his dedication to providing for our family. April brought the cancelled plans. Our anniversary dinner at the Ivy, the restaurant where he'd proposed 24 years ago, was postponed due to an urgent client crisis. The theatre tickets Isla had given us for my birthday went unused when Robert suddenly had to flee to Liverpool, each. Disappointment came with elaborate apologies and promises to make it up to me later. Later never came. Eleanor Davies first appeared as a name in casual conversation. Eleanor from accounting thinks we shoulder structure the quarterly reports. LLANER suggested a new software, system for client tracking. Just another colleague at Robert's expanding firm, someone whose opinion he valued professionally. Then I started seeing her on his phone. The first picture was innocent enough, a group shot from the office Christmas party, which I hadn't attended due to the flu. Eleanor was bland, petite, standing just close enough to Robert to catch my eye. She had the kind of bright, unlined face that spoke of someone at least 10 years younger than my 47, but it was the second picture that made my stomach churn. Robert and Eleanor in what looked like a coffee shop, her 3 small children clustered around them. She was lowing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his arm, while a tiny girl with pigtails sat on his lap as if she belonged there. I found it by accident, scrolling through his phone to check the weather while mine was charging. The photo was dated to weeks prior, a Saturday, when Robert had claimed to be playing golf with his university friend Chris. "Robert wore these children?" I asked that night, showing him the screen. My voice wascom, curious, giving him every opportunity to explain. Robert barely glanced at the phone before rattling off his answer. "Oh, that's Eleanor from work. She's going through a messy divorce. Needed someone to talk to. Those are her kids. Cute, right? Poor things are really struggling with their parents' separation." The explanation was smooth, rehearsed, delivered with just the right amount of concern for Eleanor's fictitious plight. But I noticed how he immediately took his phone back, how his thumb moved to delete the photo without a thought. "You're helping her with her divorce," I pressed gently. "Someone has to." His tone carried that edge of righteousness that meant the conversation was over. "She doesn't have many friends, Amelia. Sometimes people just need supper through tough times." I wanted to believe him desperately, so I pushed down the uneasy feeling in me stomach and chose trust over suspicion. After all, this was Robert, my Robert, the one who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning and remembered to pick up my favorite Winion the way home from work. But the phone calls became harder to ignore. Elena's name lighting up his screen during dinner, during our morning coffee, even during Marcus's graduation ceremony. Robert would look at it, frown, and let it go to voicemail. "She's shaving a rough time," he'd explain. "Probably needs advice on the Custo Day battle." The Custo battle that, as I later found out, didn't exist because Eleanor had been divorced for 3 years. One July afternoon, Ella called while Robert was upstairs, supposedly working. We were chatting about her summer internship. She mentioned seeing her dad at the park near her apartment. "He was with a woman and her kids," Ella said, casually. "On the swings, looked like a real family outing." I almost went to say hello, but they seemed, I don't know, intimate, like I'd be interrupting something private. My hands went cold. What did the woman look like? "Blonde, pretty, younger than you." The kids were readable, 2 little boys and a girl. Dad was pushing the little girl on the swing and she was laughing her head off. It was actually really sweet, but Ela's voice trailed off. "But what, honey? It was just weird seeing Dad with other people's kids. He looked so natural with them, like he'd done it 100 times before. And the way the woman looked at him," Ila paused. "Mum, is everything good between you and Dad?" I lied seamlessly, protecting both my daughter and myself. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Dad probably just ran into his coworker and her kids. You know how he is with children." But after I hung up, I sat in the darkened living room for hours. Pieces of a puzzle I'd refused to see finally clicked into place. The late nights, the cancelled plans, the constant phone calls, the photos, and now this. My husband playing house with another woman's children while I sat at home wondering what had gone wrong in our marriage. It was then that I stopped fighting for his attention and started paying attention instead. I listened when he spoke, noting the small inconsistencies in his stories. I watched his face when his phone rang, recognizing the different expressions. He put on 4 different calls. I began to document the changes in our finances, the inexplicable withdrawals, the credit card charges from restaurants I'd never been to, the mysterious cash purchase sisted, never had an explanation. The word downsize first came up in September. Robert mentioned it casually over breakfast, as if he were discussing the weather. The housing market's pretty hot right now, he said, not looking up from his tablet. Might be smart to think about. Downsizing while we can get top dollar for this place. I knew then, from the way he avoided Myers, the careful casualness of his tone, the timing of it all. He wasn't planning to downsize with me. He was planning to expand with someone else. But Robert had made one crucial mistake in all his careful deception. He had assumed I would remain the passive, trusting wife who swallowed every Leond, accepted every excuse. He thought I would stay quiet while he dismantled our life, piece by piece. He had no idea I'd already made an appointment with Mr. Davies, the best divorce attorney in the region. Mr. Davies' office smelled of leather and expensive cologne, the kind of place where powerful people came to dismantle their lives with precision. Is at across from his mahogany desk, hands clasped, watching him review the folder he brought him. Bank statements, credit card bills, printed social media photos, evidence of a life being lived parallel to my own. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Davisade, his silver hair catching the late afternoon light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I have Tosk. Are you sure you want to proceed this way? I nodded, my voice steady, in need to protect myself and my children. My husband thinks I'm naive. I'd prefer keep thinking that until I'm ready. What I didn't tell Mr. Dill was to Davies was how I discovered Eleanor's social media presence. Ironically, it had been Isla who'd mentioned seeing posts from someone. At her dad's company, Dad's co-worker always posts these cuter family photos, she'd said during one of our weekly calls. Makes me miss being little. Ila Larnardovi's name had stuck with me until curiosity finally won out. One evening, while Robert was working late, or claiming to be, I looked her up online. What I found made my coffee grow cold in my hands. Ali wasn't just posting family photos. She was building a narrative. Photos of her children in parks. I recognized restaurants. Robert had mentioned visiting for work lunches. Even the ice cream parlor he'd taken Marcus and Ela to when they were small. But it was the captions that truly stung. Sunday adventures with my favorite people. She'd written under a picture of her daughter on the same swing set where Robert had pushed Isla 20 years ago. The child was laughing, her bland pigtails flying as a man's hands I'd recognize anywhere, held her from behind. Another post showed her children building sandcastles at the beach, teaching them that new beginnings can be beautiful. Was the caption posted, "Thesum weekend"? Robert had told me he was attending a mandatory work retreat. In the background, barely visible, booted mistakenly there, was Robert's distinctive blue polo shirt. The most devastating post came in October. A cozy dinner scene in what looked like Kalena's apartment. Candles flickering on a small table. Her children, in matching pajamas, gathered around. A man whose face was carefully cropped out of the frame. The caption read, "Grateful for the man who shows my babies what real love looks like." Some people come into your life and make you realize what you've been missing. 37 likes, 12 comments from friends and family celebrating her happiness, congratulating her on finding someone special. I stared at my laptop screen until my eyes burned. wondering how many of these people knew her. Someone special was married. But it was the financial evidence that truly revealed the extent of Robert's deception. While our own credit cards were maxed out and bills piled unpaid, mysterious charges appeared on statements I'd never seen before. A joint account I'd discovered purely by accident when mail arrived at our address for MIT and to Mrs. R. Hayes. Except the me wasn't me. I'd opened that envelope with trembling hands, finding statements for a credit card I'd never signed for, in the names of Robert and Eleanor Davies. The charges painted a picture of domestic bliss, supermarkets, toy stores, children's clothing shops. £600 at a place called Dreamy Little Furnishings. Likely bunk beds for her children. £400 at Princess. Boutique, no doubt, for her daughter. Meanwhile, our mortgage payment had been late twice, and I'd had to use my own savings to cover the electricity bill when Robert claimed his direct deposit had been delayed. The most painful discovery came when I found receipts in Robert's jacket pocket, not suspicious in themselves, just everyday purchases from a grocery store and a pharmacy. But the items told a story that broke my heart. Children's Tylenol, character band-aids with princesses and superheroes, bedtime storybooks, even a receipt for a birthday cake with Happy 4th Birthday Chloe written in pink frosting. He was living a full-fledged father's life with the children, while his own adult kids wondered why he seemed so distant during family calls. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of social media posts, copies of financial statements, photographs of receipts. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because Mr. Davies had warned me that men like Robert, successful, charming, well-connected, often tried to rewrite history during divorce proceedings. He'll claim the money was for legitimate business expenses. Mr. Davies had explained during our second meeting. He'll say the social media posts were misinterpreted, that he was just being kind to a colleague going through a hard time. Men in his position are very good at controlling narratives. I kept everything in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, a place Robert would never think to look. Every Friday, I'd make my weekly deposits, adding new evidence to the growing pile. It felt like preparing for war, which I supposate was the tipping point, came on our anniversary, October 15th, a date that had once meant romantic dinners and thoughtful gifts, long walks and whispered promises about growing old together. I'd made reservations at the Ritz 6 weeks in advance, double-checking to make sure everything was perfect. At 5 o'clock, I was pulling on the little black dress Robert had once said made me look dazzling. At 5:30, I was touching up my makeup one last time. At 6 o'clock, I was standing by the front door, heels on, coat on, car keys in hand. Robert's call came at 6:15. Amelia, I'm so sorry, but Eleanor is having an emergency, a total breakdown over the custody situation. I can't leave her alone with the kids in this state. We can postpone, maybe this weekend. I stood in our entryway, looking at myself in the mirror, dressed up with nowhere to go. Married to a man who was elsewhere playing hero to another woman's crisis. The woman whose existence he had once denied, whose relationship with him he had minimized, whose children were now more important than his wife of 23 years. Of course, I said, my voice quiet as glass. Family emergencies come first. After I hung up, I didn't take off the dress. Instead, I drove to the Ritz alone, sat at Ertable for two, and enjoyed the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. The staff were kind, pretending not to notice that the woman celebrating her anniversary was dining alone. That night, while Robert was presumably comforting Eleanor through her convenient breakdown, I called Mr. Davies from my car in the restaurant parking lot. "It's time," I said simply. The next morning, while Robert slept, exhausted from his night of emotional support, I met with Mr. Davies and his team. We spent 4 hours crafting a strategy that would protect my interest while keeping Robert completely oblivious to what was coming. The element of surprise is your greatest advantage. Mr. Davies had said, "Men like your husband operate from a position of assumed control. They make plans based on the belief that their wives will remain passive and predictable." But I was done. Bang. The week after Thanksgiving dragged by like a wounded animal. Robert moved through the house like a ghost. The unopened envelope seemed to burn whatever pocket he'd slipped it into. I watched him check his jacket, his briefcase, his bedside table drawer, always making sure it was still there. Never brave enough to face what was inside, I continued with my normal routine with an almost zen-like calm. Morning coffee, afternoon errands, evening news. But beneath the surface, I was electric with anticipation. Every time Robert's hand moved towards that envelope, every time he started to say something and then stopped, I felt like a pianist waiting for the perfect moment to strike the final chord. Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after he'd destroyed our family Thanksgiving, I was making pancakes when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate steps, speaking of a man who had finally mustered the courage to face his reckoning. Robert appeared in the kitchen doorway, the cream color envelope clutched in his trembling hands like a weapon he feared would explode. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. Clearly, he hadn't slept much. "All right, Amelia," he said. His voice, "What is this?" I flipped a pancake with ease, not turning around. "Open it and find out." The sound of paper tearing filled the kitchen. I could hear him unfolding the documents inside. The rustle of official paperwork thought would change everything. Then came the silence, long, dreadful, an absolute quiet that stretched between us like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You transferred the deed." I turned, slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time in days. His face had gone completely whitened. His hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. 3 months ago, I said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather. "It's amazing how much paperwork goes unread when you're busy playing house with another family's children. You trapped me." The words came out as a hiss, rage and disbelief. "You planned all this." I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the warmth. I protected myself. "There's a difference." The house hested it and then stopped, his mind clearly processing the implications. "Eleanor is expecting. We've been planning. Eleanor is expecting. The house hither was never yours to give," I said, setting my mug down with deliberate funny. "How that works, isn't it?" Robert's phone began to ring. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen, and I watched the color drain completely from his face. Clearly, he'd promised her something he couldn't deliver, and now reality was calling. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice falsely cheerful. "Hello, darling." Ilalana's voice was sharp enough that I could hear every word from across the kitchen. "Robert, I've been thinking about Thetamline for the house sale. The kids are so excited about their new rooms, and I want to start looking at furniture. When do you think we'll have the paperwork signed?" Robert's eyes met mine across the kitchen. I smiled sweetly and took another sip of coffee. "Actually, Eleanor, there's been a complication." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Elena spoke again, her voice had descended to a dangerous whisper. "What kind of complication?" It turns out the house is no longer technically in my name. What do you mean it's not in your name? It's your house. Robert looked at him helplessly, as if I could somehow rescue him from the mess he'd created. It turned back to my pancakes, humming softly. Amelia transferred the deed, he said finally. Not to me. I only found out today. The explosion that followed. Spectacular. Eleanor's voice reached a pitch that probably shattered glass somewhere in the neighborhood. Words like betrayed, manipulated, and lying snake filled the kitchen. And I had to admit, I was impressed by her vocabulary. Let me get this straight, Eleanor was saying when her voice finally returned to a human range. You promised me and my children a home that was never actually yours. You made me believe we had a future when you were just another cheating husband with no real plan. Eleanor, please don't you dare. Eleanor, please, with me. I've wasted 8 months of my life on a man who can't even secure us a roof over our head. My kids have been planning their new lives, and you've been lying to all of us. The line went dead. Robert stared at his phone as if it had bitten him. Then slowly he looked at me. She hung up. Surprising, I said dryly. Who could have predicted that a woman seeking financial security might lose interest when the money disappears? His phone buzzed with a text message. Then another and another. I couldn't see the screen. But Robert's face told me all I need to know about Eleanor's final thoughts on their relationship. 23 years, he said suddenly, his voice breaking. 23 years of marriage, and you destroy everything with paperwork. I turned to face him squarely, and for the first time since this whole mess had begun, I let my anger show. I destroyed it. I destroyed our marriage. I slammed the spatula down hard enough to make him flinch. You stood in our dining room in front of our children and announced your plans to sell our home for your girlfriend's convenience. But somehow, I'm the one who destroyed our marriage. You could have talked to me when the word came out, sharp as broken glass. Between your late nights at work and your emergency calls from Eleanor. Between your lies about golf games and your secret credit cards. Exactly when was I supposed to have this conversation with the stranger wearing my husband's face? Robert tried. Calling Marcus and Isla that afternoon. I watched him pace the living room, leaving one Noonswood voicemail after another. When Marcus finally picked up on the 4th call, their conversation lasted exactly 30 seconds. "We're with Mum," Marcus said. His voice was clearly audible through the speaker. "You made Yorshuas a Thanksgiving dinner. We've made ours." The response was even shorter when Robert called her. "Don't call me again until you're ready to apologize to Mum. And I mean a real apology, not the fake corporate language you've been using." By Saturday, I was hosting my book club brunch in the kitchen Robert had once planned to give to Eleanor. 8 women gathered around the island where I'd laid out fresh fruit, croissants, and the kind of expensive coffee I'd been rationing back. Our finances were tight. The laughter that filled the space felt different than it had in months. Lighter. Freer. "Amelia, you seem so relaxed lately," my friend Sarah remarked, reaching for another strawberry. "You're practically glowing." I looked at the women who had been my friends for years, sitting in the house I had protected, enjoying the life I had fought to preserve. "I feel like I finally stopped holding my breath," I said. And for the first time in months, that was entirely true. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday in February, delivered by a messenger who looked apologetic for interrupting my morning coffee. I signed them with steady hands, noticing how Robert had filed first, his last attempt to control a narrative that had already slipped from his grasp like water. Mr. Davies had warned me this would happen. Men like Robert need to feel they're driving the process, he'd explained during one of our strategy sessions. Let him file, let him think he's taking control. Meanwhile, we'll be 3 steps ahead with our counterclaim. I left the papers on my kitchen counter unopened. There'd be time to review Robert's version of our marriage's dissolution later. For now, I had a life to rebuild. And surprisingly, it felt lighter with each passing day. Robert had moved out in January, taking only his clothes and leaving behind 23 years of shared memories, as if they were someone else's possessions. He rented a small apartment across town, not the spacious house he'd promised Eleanor, but something that would serve while he grouped. I learned from Ela that Eleanor had given him an ultimatum after their breakup. Prove he could provide the stability she needed or lose her permanently. Apparently, he'd chosen to fight for her. Spring brought an unexpected development. Ela called me one sunny April morning, her voice bubbling with news that chilled me to the bone. "Mum, you aren't not going to believe this," she said. "Dad's getting remarried to Eleanor in June." My coffee cup almost slipped from my hand. Remarried already? I know, right? The divorce isn't even final yet. But apparently Eleanor forgave him after promise they'd try for a baby together. She wants to give her kids a sibling, and Dad is totally on board Ababy. At 51, Robert was planning to start over completely, erase his first family, and build a new one, with a woman 20 years his junior. The audacity was breathtaking. "Are you invited?" I asked carefully. Lalisla was bitter. Both of us, Marcus and I, Dad, sent formal invitations, like who, were distant relatives instead of his children. Marcus threw his in the trash, but I'm thinking of going just to watch the spectacle. After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, processing this latest twist. Robert wasn't just moving on, he was rewriting his entire identity. The man who had complained about changing diapers when our kids were babies was now promising to do it all again. But something nagged at me. Eleanor was 32, young enough to have more children. But why was she so focused on getting pregnant immediately? The urgency felt desperate, as if she were trying to secure Robert with biological ties before he could change his mind again. The answer came in May through a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. I was at the supermarket when I saw Eleanor. In the pharma section, speaking on the phone in low, angry tones. I ducked behind the vitamin display, not proud of my eavesdropping, but unable to resist. The custody agreement demands it. She was saying, if I want to move the kids out of state, their father needs proof that my new husband can support additional children. It's some archaic clause about family planning and financial stability. They need a fertility test. My heart began to race. Eleanor needed Robert Toproff. He could have children as part of her custody agreement. But what Eleanor didn't know, what Robert himself had forgotten in his midlife crisis fog, was the secret he'd buried 24 years ago. That night, I made a phone call I'd been avoiding for months. "Dr. Evans. It's Amelia Hayes. I need to ask you something confidential about my husband's medical history." Dr. Evans had been our family doctor for over 2 decades. She delivered both my children, treated Robert's high blood pressure, and knew secrets about our family going back years. "Amelia," Dr. Evans said warmly, "how can I help you? Robert's getting remarried. His new wife, 1 children. I need to know. Do you remember the results of that fertility test he had done after Isla was born?" The silence on the other end stretched, long enough for me to think we'd been disconnected. "Amelia," Dr. Evans said finally, "that information is confidential. I cannot discuss a patient's medical history, even with their spouse. But hypothetically, I pressed, if someone were to request a copy of those old test results for legal purposes, would they still be on file? Another pause. Hypothetically, medical records are kept for 30 years. Hypothetically, if someone with legal standing were to request those records as part of a divorce proceeding, she let sentence hang in the air. I understood perfectly. The next morning, I called Mr. Davies with a request. Within a week, Robert's full medical history was subpoenaed as part of our divorce proceedings, buried in 24 years of routine checkups and prescription records. Was a single test result Robert had asked Dr. Evans to keep confidential at the time. The irony was poetic. After Leela's difficult birth, Robert had secretly been tested because he was worried about having more children. The results had shown several lie compromised fertility. Not impossible, but unlikely without medical intervention. He had never told me, choosing instead to let me blame myself for our inability to have more children after Isla now, 24 years later. That very test result was about to derail his plans for domestic bliss with Lillinor. Mr. Davies' team arranged for the medical records to be delivered to Robert on his wedding day, not out of cruelty, but because the timing fit perfectly with Eleanor's custody harangue scheduled for the following Monday. She would need those fertility results as proof for the court. I spent that Saturday morning in my garden, planting roses where Robert's golf clubs used to stand in the garage. The irony was not lost on me. I was literally blooming where he had once taken up space. My phone rang at 4:30 p.m. Ila's number. "Mum," her voice taut with surprise, said Laughter, "you are not going to believe what just happened. Try me. The wedding's off. Eleanor found out Dad can't have kids. Apparently, she opened some medical records that were delivered to him this morning. She read them while she was getting her hair done, and by the time Dad got to the venue, she'd already left town with her kids." I closed my eyes, feeling the warm sun on my face. "That's unfortunate, Mum," Ela said suspiciously. "You wouldn't know anything about those medical records, would you?" "Your father's medical history is his business," I said truthfully. "If he chose not to share important information with his fiancée, that's on them." That evening, I sat on my front porch with Marcus and Illa, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of victory. Robert was somewhere at Crosstown, probably sitting in an empty banquet hall, surrounded by centerpieces no one would see, and a future that had evaporated like morning mist. Meanwhile, we were exactly where we belonged, in the house he tried to give away, building new memories on the foundation of old ones, proving that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's choices destroy your happiness. Karma, I'd learned, doesn't always arrive when you expect it, but when it does, it has impeccable timing. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn when the invitation arrived in Memo bucks, cream cardstock, elegant script, the kind of formal announcement that spoke of new beginnings and careful planning. Marcus's engagement party scheduled for the first weekend of November at the country club where he'd learned to swim as a boy. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering, smiling at the full circle life had come. My son had found love with Sarah, a brilliant architect who made him laugh in ways I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. They'd been dating for 2 years, but something about this past year had solidified their relationship in a way that spoke of permanence and true partnership. Layla was thriving, too. She'd graduated summa cum laude and landed a position at a prestigious Senverenton law firm in London. Her voice during our weekly calls carried a confidence that hadn't existed before, as if watching me rebuild my life had given her permission to dream bigger for her own. The house had truly become my 9 ways that went beyond legal documents. I'd repainted the living room a soft sage green, hung artwork Itchison without consulting anyone else's opinion, and converted Robert's old office into a reading nook, filled with plants and natural light. The space breathed differently now, unburdened by pretense and hidden resentments. My morning routine had evolved into something I genuinely looked forward to: coffee on the back porch, 20 minutes of yoga in the sunroom, and then whatever the day brought without the constant tension that had defined the last years of my marriage. Some mornings I gardened, others I painted watercolors that would never hang in galleries, but gave me quiet satisfaction. On Wednesdays, I volunteered at the downtown women's shelter, helping other women navigate the legal complexities of starting over. Mr. Davies had become more than just my attorney. He'd become a friend whose wisdom extended far beyond legal strategy. Our professional relationship had ended when the divorce was finalized 6 months ago, but we still met occasionally for coffee and talked about books or local politics. He had never remarried after his own divorce 15 years prior, and while neither of us had addressed the topic of anything beyond friendship, there was an ease between us that felt like possibility. Robert's story had taken a different trajectory. After Eleanor's departure, he had spiraled in a way that once would have worried me. He'd lost his job 3 months after the wedding disaster, officially due to restructuring, but everyone knew his reputation for reliability had shattered along with his personal life. His attempts to rebuild with Eleanor had failed spectacularly when she'd moved to Birmingham with her children and a new boyfriend, leaving no forwarding address. I learned from Marcus that Robert now worked as a freelance consultant, lived in a studio apartment, and drove a 10-year-old sedan. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and planned other people's futures was learning what it meant to start over at 52 with nothing but his pride, and even thought was damaged. But the most surprising development had come last month. Robert had called me directly for the first time since the divorce, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Amelia," he'd said, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I need to know, will you be at Marcus' engagement party?" The question had caught me off guard. "Of course I will. He's my son. I want to go, too. But I want, if it makes you uncomfortable. I know I've forfeited the right to claim space at our children's celebrations, but I'd like to try and rebuild some sort of relationship with them, if that's possible." I had sat in my kitchen, looking out at the garden where Robert's golf clubs used to live, considering my answer. The woman I had been a year ago might have used this opportunity to deliver a final blow, to remind him of everything he'd sacrificed for 8 months of midlife fantasy. But the woman I had become understood that my peace didn't require his continued suffering. "Robert," I had said finally, "Marcus and Dila are adults. Their relationships with you are their choice. But I won't be there as an. You can't try to mend what you broke with them." The engagement party arrived with perfect October weather, crisp air, bright blue skies, the kind of day that made everything feel possible. I chose a navy blue dress that made me feel confident without trying too hard. I paired it with the pearl earrings my mother had given me and drove to the country club with the windows down and the music up. Marcus looked radiant in his suit. Sarah glowered beside him in a champagne-colored gown. They moved through the crowd like people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, stopping to talk to friends and family who had gathered to celebrate their future together. Robert arrived, halfway through the cocktail hour, looking uncertain as he stood in theaterway scanning the room. He'd lost weight, and his hair had more grey than he remembered, but he had dressed carefully for the occasion. When Marcus saw him, I watched my son's face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. What I saw surprised me. Not forgiveness exactly, but something softer than Thenja that had defined their relationship for the past year. Marcus approached his father with Sarah at his side and spoke quietly for several minutes before. Marcus introduced Serato, the man who had missed so much of their courtship. Isla joined them a few minutes later. Andy watched from across the room as my children made their own choices about redemption and second chances. They were kind but not abusive, polite but not warm. Robert would have to earn his way back into their lives, one conversation at a time, and there were no guarantees he would succeed. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on the terrace, overlooking the golf course where Robert had once spent his Saturday mornings. The irony was not lost on me. I was reclaiming space in a world he had once dominated, while he was inside trying to rebuild Bridgeshed burned for someone who had never truly known him. Mr. Davies appeared at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. "How are you doing?" I accepted the glass, considering the question thoughtfully. "Better than well, actually. Good. Really genuinely good." He smiled. "You've earned it." Looking back at the party through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Marcus and Sarah cutting their engagement cake as Ela snapped photos and Robert stood slightly apart, uncertain of his place, but grateful to be included. This was my new life. Not perfect but honest, not without challenges, but built on a foundation of my own choosing. I had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction. Not tearing down the person who hurt you, but building something better from the pieces they left behind. The woman who had sat at that Thanksgiving table 11 months ago had been afraid of losing everything. The woman standing on this terrace had discovered that sometimes losing everything is just another way of saying you're finally free to choose what comes next. And what came next felt like a possibility stretching to the horizon, bright with promise and entirely mine. If this story of sweet revenge kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Amelia, calmly, handed Robert that mysterious envelope, the Thanksgiving scene, knowing exactly what bombshell it contained.